Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 115. We left off earlier today talking about Prince Andrew and how he was not willing to cooperate with the FBI's investigation. And to me, that smacks of a man who has something to hide. Why would he not want to clear his name? Wasn't that what the original interview was about in the first place with Emily Maitlis? Wasn't that interview to put a line underneath this and move on and clear his name? Well, as we all know, that did not occur. In fact, it was like watching the Hindenburg in slow motion crash. That's how bad his interview was. And now, after that interview where he went on record and said for everybody to hear that he was willing to speak to whatever authorities were investigating the case that thought that they might need to speak to him, he said that he would be willing to talk to them. Well, here we are now, and the FBI has come out and said that he is not the FBI, the U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman has come out and said that he is not being cooperative. He has had zero cooperation from this man. Now, does that sound like a man who is not guilty, folks? Does that sound like a man who does not have anything to hide? Does that sound like a man who is looking to clear his name? Not to me, it doesn't. What it looks like and what it sounds like to me is a man that has a whole lot to hide. A man who is being advised by his high-profile lawyers to keep his fat mouth shut. And that is exactly what I expect Prince Andrew to continue to do. I expect him to continue to obfuscate. I expect him to continue to keep things on the hush, and I expect him to hope that this all blows over, when in reality, that is not going to be the case. This man has no out at this point. He has to speak to the authorities, or he is going to be just completely and utterly destroyed in the press forever. And look, we all understand that Prince Andrew met Virginia Roberts. We all understand that they were all together on the night in question. We've seen the picture. We've heard the corroborating witnesses. We've heard from other people who have seen them who saw them that night. We have heard all of this, folks. And yet Prince Andrew continues to lie. Prince Andrew continues to hide. Well, guess what? Guess what, Prince Andrew? The jig is up, my friend. The jig is up for you now. You're not cooperating with the FBI. You're not doing anything to, help these survivors of Jeffrey Epstein get over what they suffered. All you're doing really is making yourself look even worse, if that's even possible at this point. Come clean. Prince Andrew, come clean. Just admit what you have done and try and move on with your life. All right? Because the walls are closing in, my friend, and you can only hide behind the hem of Mummy's skirt for so long. All right, folks, so on to tonight's article. Tonight's article has to do with the Virgin Islands, and the AG from the Virgin Islands has a bit of an issue with the executors of Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So we're going to see what she has to say about that. And this article is from the New York Post, and it was written by Priscilla DeGregory at 8:12 p.m. on January 27th, 2020. Headline: Virgin Islands AG says Jeffrey Epstein estate executors have a conflict of interest. I think you all have a conflict of interest. I think the AG has a conflict of interest as well. As I've stated here on the podcast before, I don't think the AG should be going after the money. This money from Jeffrey Epstein's estate should go to the survivors of his reign of terror. How is it even possible that this lady thinks that the Virgin Islands should get this dough? It's just inconceivable to me. The Attorney General for the U.S. Virgin Islands said she does not trust the two executors of Jeffrey Epstein's estate to handle the case because they have a conflict of interest, according to new court papers. Attorney General Denise George alleged in a January 15th lawsuit that Epstein sexually abused so many underage girls on his private islands, Little St. James and Great St. James, as recently as last year that he needed a computer database to keep track of them. The AG is seeking forfeitures and penalties, including the seizure of his 2 islands. So that's funny. She says that he had a database and there were so many victims that he kept track of all of them. Concede that point. I'm sure he did have something like that. But what is disgusting to me from the AG's perspective, she's seeking forfeitures and penalties, including the seizure of his 2 islands. Meanwhile, she just gets done saying that there's a whole entire database of girls who were abused by Epstein. You don't think they're entitled to this money? You think you're entitled to it and your government's entitled to it? So what? So all of you can wet your beaks and get a little bit richer off of the pain and suffering of these survivors from Jeffrey Epstein? Nah, that's not going to fly, Ms. George. Sorry, that will not cut it. Now George wants to intervene in the dead pedophile's estate case to make sure her claims are represented and to ensure Virgin Island laws are followed, especially given, George says, the fact that the executors of the estate have a conflict of interest, according to court documents made public on Monday. George says there is a conflict of interest because the 2 executors of the financier's estate, pedophile's estate, Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, served as officers of or trustees of companies and Epstein's trust, which are named in her lawsuit. This whole thing is crazy down here in the Virgin Islands, in my opinion. All of these players down here are shady, right? Miss George is shady, Darren Indyke shady, Richard Kahn is shady. They're all shady. The government has an interest in the assets of the estate, as well as an interest in ensuring the laws of the Virgin Island are enforced for the benefit of the government and victims of Epstein's crimes, George wrote in the court filings. Oh, so it's nice of you to finally mention the victims. So are the state, if the Virgin Islands seizes this land, that's going to make the victims feel better? They're going to feel like they have justice because you seized Jeffrey Epstein's islands and then you sold them off and all of you got rich and the victims got peanuts? Yeah, I'm sure that makes them feel great. I'm sure that makes the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's reign of terror feel fantastic. The executors of the estate, who are alleged to have been affiliated with various entities that participated in Epstein's criminal enterprise, cannot adequately protect the rights of the interests of the government. Well, yeah, you were trusting these 2 guys. Anyone who was trusting Jeffrey Epstein's, the people that were running his estate, the executors of his estate, they're crazy, all right? We know that these guys are squirrely. We know that anybody that was working with Epstein or hanging out with Epstein is questionable at best, and these guys weren't just working with them. They were so hip deep that they were the executors. So come on, I can understand that point by Miss George here, but the fact that she's trying to get her grubby fingers on this money really bothers me. Intervention is the only vehicle available to assure that the government will not suffer detrimental harm by the actions of the executors, George said. Again, the government will not suffer detrimental harm? Newsflash for you, Miss George. The survivors have suffered detrimental harm, not only at Jeffrey Epstein's hands, oh no, but at your own government's enabling of it, by looking the other way, by accepting money from Jeffrey Epstein, by letting him become a normal part of your society. You enabled all of this. So what makes you think that your government's entitled to 1 single red cent from this man's estate? Not 1 cent, in my opinion. All of that money would be much better served to the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's reign of terror. I don't understand why this government is trying to even get involved in this as far as getting the money. It really angers me. If any of Epstein's $577 million fortune is distributed to victims, the VI government should be involved because of its interest in the assets and disposition of the estate, and because the Attorney General's authority and responsibility to advocate for the public interest and enforce the laws of the Virgin Islands, George said. So in plain speak, she's saying that the Virgin Islands are just as entitled to this money as the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm telling her right here and right now that that's a bunch of BS, and there is no way that should ever occur. That is just absolutely horrible to think about. even $1 being siphoned off away from these survivors, these people, these women who have had this burden on their shoulders for years and years and years, while the government of the Virgin Islands, along with the other governments, look the other way. And now they want their piece. They had their piece on the front end when Jeffrey Epstein was wetting all their beaks and filling their palms with dough, and now they want their cut on the back end too. Boy, sure sounds like the mafia to me. Epstein died by suicide in a lower Manhattan lockup in August as he was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Allegedly, the 66-year-old hedge funder pedophile put all of his holdings into a trust when he filed his will 2 days before his death. His estate has since been sued by over 24 women who claim they were sexually abused or raped when they were underage. The estate has sought to set up a victim compensation fund to handle paying all of the alleged victims. A lawyer with the estate and a lawyer for the executors did not immediately return a request for comment. And it's not just underage girls, by the way, folks. It's, women of age as well that were abused by this man. And he exerted his power over everybody who came into his atmosphere, including ex-presidents, including business moguls. It didn't matter. Everybody was being bent to Jeffrey Epstein's will. Him and Ghislaine Maxwell were bending and forming and molding everybody to what they wanted when they were around them. And everybody was willing to look the other way simply because they thought that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell could do something for them. That's how it would start. And then after that, well, we all understand what happened then. They got sucked into the blackmail operation, and it was a wrap from there. So I don't understand how the estate here, how the Virgin Islands here thinks they're getting anything out of this, all right? It's just absolutely disgusting on its face to think that this lady would try and funnel this money to the government when they all knew, all of them, the whole government probably knew, in my opinion, right? That's not look, people talk, folks, right? People talk. People talk about rumors. People spill tea at work all the time. People like to get around the water cooler and do a little bit of gossiping. It happens. You don't think it happens in these offices? You are mistaken, okay? These government offices especially, they love the chitter chatter. So to think that the people in this government had no idea, that's ridiculous to me. And if they think they're getting any money out of this, well, I'm sure they're going to meet heavy, heavy pushback. All right, folks, if you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. If you would like to help support the podcast, you can do that by clicking on the GoFundMe link inside of the description box. All right, everybody, I hope you have a great night. We'll be back tomorrow to catch up where we left off.